Right, hello everyone, and welcome to our final session of the Decolonisation in Practice conference. For those of you who've been with us throughout the week, thank you for sticking with us and engaging with the sessions and taking part in the discussions. I'm joined today by Nick Smith, a man who has over his time held many different hats, sabbatical officer, NUS staff member, university administrator, and now a consultant and trainer in and around higher education and student unions. And he's going to talk to us today about what all of this looks like from a university administrator's point of view and how you can use that information to try and make some change. Take it away, Nick.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Tom. And for those of you who've gone all the way through the conference, congratulations for getting this far. I apologise in some ways that I'm ending up being the last thing. I hope I will end with a bang to some extent and not a fizzle. I must say that looking at kind of how many wonderful people you've had speaking, I've got kind of imposter syndrome a little bit, but I hope that this session will be useful to you. I did have a kind of tedious biography slides. Let's see if that's coming up. Brilliant, there you go. Just in terms of my background, and I have been a student activist and students union officer a little while ago now, but I've worked for NUS in terms of supporting local students unions, mainly in the field of governance. And by governance, people can refer to that in lots of different ways. Sometimes they talk about it in terms of systems, sometimes about leadership. I really think it's about power. I really think it's about how decisions are made and therefore understanding how you can influence those decisions, which is incredibly relevant to campaigners we're going to talk about all the way through. I worked in university governance, again, in terms of that kind of power aspect, but also a faculty leadership role. I was executive officer to a pro-vice chancellor in a university in London. And also, for the last kind of 5 years now, I've been a consultant and a trainer for students' unions, but also universities. I've kind of roamed around organisations, kind of helping them out. And that's kind of my background. So very much from a student activist kind of origin, understanding where that's kind of some of those drives, but also understanding what the university sector is like and what it's like being a university person. And that's kind of the premise of my discussion, really. So what I'm going to be covering will be applicable to all campaigns. So whilst this is about decolonising in practice, I'm less about the decolonising and more about the practice. Okay. A lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about is tactics outside of the campaigning aspect. And what I mean by that is that if, for example, you've been talking to Citizens UK about community organising, and you've been talking about perhaps kind of what you might see as a kind of as activist activity in terms of getting people on boards and getting your message across. This is really about the next stage. Okay, so what happens once the campaign goal has been set and someone starts listening to you? What do you do then? Because that's not when it ends. I'm going to give you some insights about what it's like to be on the other side of lobbying. When you get activists coming up to you and saying, Nick, I would like you to do X, Y, and Z, and reasons why I might say no to that. Okay, we're going to talk about some of the issues and drivers for universities. And look, you might disagree on what I say. Okay, I'm conscious that a lot of you will be from Birmingham. Hello. Lots of you will be from elsewhere. And by the nature of this discussion and by the nature of the fact that we're going to talk about tailoring, you're going to have to really think about what it's like in your institution, and that will be different. I'm also going to get my kind of pedagogical excuse in early and say I apologise, but there won't be that much room in this discussion for kind of interaction. By the fact, the nature of kind of the fact you'll say disparate, and what I'm going to be talking about is about doing stuff tailored. That makes it quite difficult. There'll be lots of opportunities for questions, but just to give you a heads up on that now. So, you know, apologies in advance, I suppose. A couple of days ago, you might have seen there was a kind of Twitter storm about Woolworths, about bringing back Woolworths. And for those of us who kind of grew up in the 80s and 90s, Woolworths was a kind of big part of our lives. This Woolworths store is actually the one that was in Blackfen in South London, opposite where I worked at my Saturday job in a sixth form. And Woolworths was famous really for the pick a mix, which kind of teenagers would kind of pick up and not shoplift and definitely pay for at the end. But pick a mix, if you're not aware, is kind of a series of different sweets that you choose what you want from it, and you go and pay at the end. And really, this session is about a pick a mix of tactics and opportunities for you to think about. So some of this will definitely be applicable to you, some of it won't be, and that's fine. But I'm going to talk through a range of things. And what I really want you to do at the end of this is to go away and think about how it could apply to you and which of those tactics you're going to choose, and which one of those you're going to discard, like those hard toffees that are bad for your teeth from the pick a mix. So that's kind of the sense of my session, if that helps. The other thing, I don't spend all my time on Twitter, but the other thing from Twitter that kind of inspired the session to some extent was this graphic that I saw doing the rounds a couple of weeks ago. The idea is about how administrators in universities defeat student campaigns. It came from a student activist group that I don't think has been active for about 5 or 6 years, but for some reason it kind of re-emerged a couple of weeks ago. And they suggest there were 4 steps about administrators defeating student activism. And when I read this, I kind of went, I can see where you're coming from, but I don't necessarily think that the idea of defeat is what we're looking at here, because it suggests a desire, a drive that I don't think is actually present. I think this is how student campaigns falter and how they finish. I don't think that's necessarily about defeat. I think it's about the fact that student campaigns don't always interact properly with universities and university bureaucracies, and that's how they kind of fall flat, rather than it being a kind of active decision from universities to quash student activism in this way. There's a writer called Hanlon who said, "Never attribute to malice that which is adequately attributed to stupidity." And I think on the whole, people are good people. If you've not read Human Kindness, it's a great book that talks about and kind of squashes some of the ideas that people are out to be mean on the whole, and that human nature is in some way to do with being selfish. And it says actually it's not the case when you look at it, but sometimes people are stupid. I think, if you like, there's a kind of Smith's razor, which I'm suggesting here, which is that sometimes people do stuff out of habit and out of process, and it's just what they do. And I think that happens in universities an awful lot. And I would say try not to attribute to malice that which is adequately attributed to habit in relation to the way universities operate. Okay, and we're going to be discussing that. So just going back to what those steps were on that graphic, the idea is that students present demands to a university who ignore them or dismisses them in some way. Students escalate pressure through campaigning, which is the exciting bit that you've probably been talking about throughout the last couple of days. The administrator offers to set up a committee to look into issues and offer recommendations. At this point, students go, "Victory is ours, that's fantastic." And lastly, the committee itself drags its feet, and then experienced activists leave. And I think that might happen, but I'm going to talk about each one of these in turn. So if students do present demands to universities who ignore them or dismiss them, I suppose the first question for me is, why would you ignore them? And I don't mean, and remember that we're not talking about malice here. So why do you ignore them? Assuming that people aren't doing it just to be awkward and just because they hate students. The first one actually is they might not understand the demand that you're asking for. Okay, they might not understand specifically the kind of the needs, but they might not understand what you're asking for at all. Now, I would say with something like decolonizing, I would hope that people kind of understand the needs of that. I think that I would hope that, given what's gone on in society and in the media and kind of the sustained campaigning work of student activists over many years, that people understand that the academic texts are skewed in terms of very kind of specific viewpoints, and there is a need to kind of decolonize that. I think that's probably there, okay, or I'd hope it would be. I would say, however, that there is some people are ignorant and they will need to be educated, and I really understand the frustration of campaigners going, "I can't believe we've still got to talk about this." But I do think that actually sometimes you might need to do that piece of work to ensure that the issue is not ignored, and that's really frustrating, and I have sympathy for you, but that might be something you need to do. The other thing that I would say about understanding the demand is I sometimes see in student activism words or phrases are taken and applied without really thinking that through. And I worked with some student activists recently who they said they weren't just decolonizing the curriculum, they were decolonizing, I think it was the registry. And what they were talking about was saying that they thought that the kind of administrative process of the university were not fit for purpose and they weren't accessible. And I had to think about that because I can see why you would use the phrase of colonization and the concept of that in relation to academia, to say that a very specific viewpoint and academic approach has colonized the range of human knowledge and pedagogy in a very specific way and stopped other kind of views coming in. I'm not sure I would say the same about registry processes. I'm not sure they've been colonized by another and therefore kind of been halted. I think they might be inaccessible, that's one thing, but I'm not sure I understand the demand of decolonizing the registry in the same way that I do understand decolonizing the curriculum. So that's an example. Also in students' unions, we tend to be, and students tend to be further along the line in terms of progression. And so, I mean, you know, it is fascinating to me that that society as a whole are talking about trans rights so strongly at the moment, and quite rightly. It was a discussion that I remember having in the early 2000s in my university. Yeah, so actually, I think sometimes, well, we might need to tailor our approach and our language to the people that we're lobbying, because they may not understand, they may not have the kind of education and the knowledge to get kind of understand where the demand's coming from. As I say, I don't think that applies necessarily to decolonizing the curriculum. It might do to other areas. It also might be ignored because they're not the right person to deal with this. And this could mean that they are too high, and it could mean that they are too low in terms of the structure. Those of you, and I know there's some of you who are student presidents, you might get students coming up to you and saying, I've got this really massive issue about my course. And the student president might probably go, well, thanks very much. That's not for me to deal with. They're kind of passing it on, because actually they're not looking at course level issues, they're looking at kind of university level issues. If you go to your pro-vice chancellor or a vice chancellor and talk about something that applies to a single course, they might go, hold on a second, that's not really for me to deal with. So are you kind of getting the right person to deal with it? Also, though, it might be that some people that you don't appreciate how much power they have and how much influence they have could be the ones that can work on things. So, for instance, very often there will be a series of kind of policy staff members working around senior academics, and actually you might be wanting to lobby them. When I was the executive officer for a faculty back in the day, actually it was me who was kind of controlling and supporting the agenda of the pro-vice chancellor, and student activists coming and talking to me might get more influence and more sway than if they go direct to the pro-vice chancellor. That was the setup of that institution. It's not always the case. And so it's worth working out if you are who is the right person to deal with this. We'll give you some tactics about how to ensure you're kind of focusing properly in a bit. So don't worry too much about that. Some people may have too much on. There may simply be no capacity, and that's why it gets ignored. And sometimes for you, therefore, it's about ensuring that you kind of go back with the same demand later when they've got kind of less on. There's also might be too many demands being made. And if you've been to other sessions, I'm sure that those campaigners have talked about being clear and precise on your demands. I can remember doing student officer training back at NUS many years ago, and we would do kind of campaign training stuff, and someone said that their aim was to overthrow capitalism. I'm like, okay, that's fine, that's great. But maybe you want to kind of set a few specific demands in relation to that before you start. Yep, so what are the specific next steps you want to do rather than overthrow capitalism? And that's cool, but you know, there's quite a lot of demands being made in that. What are the specific demands you're asking for here? The other reasons that the other thing that you might do is dismiss them. And again, this might be accepted by malice. So one of them might be there's no clear demand given. So it might be that you understand the demands in theory, but you just haven't been given a demand. I did some work with a university quite recently who are doing some work on widening participation with the university. I was doing some consultancy for them. And the person I was speaking to was in the Vice Chancellor's office. And I was told, right, but just to warn you, as you come up today, there's going to be some extra security. Fine, no problem. But I turn up and they say, yeah, we've been told there's going to be a student occupation. I'm like, okay, great, fine, activism at work, brilliant. And I was like, what's the students want? And they looked at me and said, we just don't know. We know that there is going to be an action which disrupts us, which asks us to do something, which is aims at kind of causing some discomfort so that we have to act, but we have no idea what that demand is. We have no idea what that demand is at all. And clearly that's a problem. And so therefore it kind of gets dismissed, basically because you can't do anything about it, you don't know what you need to do. Sometimes there's no evidence for them to act, and this is really frustrating, and it's because sometimes you were surprised to hear that decision makers in university very often like to make decisions based on research and facts, and that's because universities are places that pride themselves on their research and their facts. And I've been in a situation where people have given me a demand and I've gone, great, you've given it to me, I can't pass it on to anyone because they're going to say, prove it, and you have not given me any evidence, and I can't create that somehow. So make sure you've got evidence for them to act. And that might be about kind of saying, we've got evidence by these students who have signed a petition. It might be about saying evidence because you can say other organizations have done it and they've seen an improvement as a relation to this action, whatever it might be. But give people evidence so they can act. And there may be too many things on and it's not a priority. That's not to say that what you want to do is not important, but for example, universities are all dealing with COVID at the moment, and they might be saying we need to concentrate on that. There will be a point where you have to do submissions about your research work, and there's a kind of really intense period of work. At that point, they may be saying we have to concentrate on this. If you chat to registries in November, they're all busy getting their student numbers together so they can pass those on to HESA, Higher Education Statistics Agency, OFS, to say how many students they get in terms of finance. It's a really busy time. Don't ask your registrars for things in the last 2 weeks of November. It's not a good point. Yeah, there might be too many things on. So if those are the reasons why they might be ignored or dismissed, then it's really up to activists to make universities want to do these things as best they can. And the first thing to say, though, is that there is no university. I think it's really unhelpful to think of the university as a monolithic organization where everyone thinks and feels the same, where everyone's got the same drivers, the same demands. In the same way, that's not the case for the student body. Some of your students are at university because they want to experience being an activist and a campaigner. Some because they want to get drunk and have a student lifestyle in the kind of the sense of some media outlets. Some want to do it because they have a view of an ivory tower, and of the way that education is in a kind of Brideshead revisited idea. That's all fine. There's lots of different students at university for a different reason. Similarly, lots of people who work for universities do it for different reasons. Some do it because they believe in research excellence, some because they want to do widening participation and get more students into the doors, some because they believe that universities should do public engagement and be kind of pillars of their community. So it's really important that you think about what is the need and desire of the person or group that I am lobbying in particular, and not think that everyone in the university acts the same. So it's important that you understand where power lies. That's not always at the top. Some of the kind of highest level university meetings will not quite be rubber stamping, but they are unlikely to want to get into the detail, whereas when you've got policy officers working lower down the chain, creating papers, they might be the people to actually be lobbying and talking about these issues. It's really important that you communicate and learn from other activists. If you are doing work on decolonising the curriculum, fantastic, but also learn from the activists that are trying to do work on improving women's voices in the curriculum. Yeah. It's not to say that you have to do exactly the same thing, but they might know about some of the activists, about some of the people and the power structures in the university, and that information might be useful to you. So communicate and learn from them, but also make sure you've got a record of what has worked and what hasn't within your own student group. That's really key. Tailor the approach to each person or group. If people, so again, I have been lobbied by student activists. It doesn't take much of a Google to find out that I've got a student activist background. and therefore the way that you approach me should probably be different to someone who has never stepped foot in the students' union their entire life. Yep. So tailor your approach to each person or group. And it's useful to understand what the drives are for each person or group. What are they like? Yeah, I suppose that's kind of really kind of relatively straightforward. Where possible, if someone else has said something better than me, then I am keen on promoting them and talking about it. This was someone called Steve Cross, who I think's at UCL. He said something very sensible on Twitter, and I've stolen it. But thanks, Steve. There's all your details if you want to kind of keep that. He talked about at a conference about managing upwards in universities. So his approach was for a staff member that wants to get something from their boss, but I think it's really useful and can be applied to student campaigns and representatives as well. So if you want to lobby someone, what are their goals? What do they want to achieve in their life? And that will help you think about your message. Some people's goals is simply to have an easy life and to do the least possible work. Fine. Others actually, they go, what I want to do is change the way the university does X, Y, or Z. Okay, so what are their goals? What people do they want to influence? Some people basically want to be influenced, basically want to influence students, yeah, and want to go, what I do helps students' lives, that's great, fantastic. Others want to make sure that their bosses are happy, whatever it might be. If you know who they want to influence, that's helpful, because if you get those people on board, then sometimes you can kind of correlate and ensure that those things are all kind of linked together. What metrics are they being judged by? One of my regular clients is a students' union who their university are obsessed by the National Student Survey, the NSS, and everything they do is through the prism of, will this improve our NSS results? Okay. Fascinating conversation, because NSS is being reviewed, and if that goes, there's going to be a real issue for them to kind of think about what they need to do next, and that's fine. But in that context, if the NSS is the big thing they're being judged by, if you can frame how you think your activist work will improve NSS scores, even if you disagree with the NSS, that's clearly a way that you can get your goal through. Yeah. If people are told, if someone's being told actually what they really need to do is improve engagement in the local community, then if you can talk about what you're doing in relation to that, that's going to help you. So can you help them improve? Can you help them meet the metrics they're being judged by? Yeah. What's causing them discomfort at the moment is COVID, but there might be different things that people are feeling uncomfortable by. Where do they see the university going? Some universities are saying what we're really about is research excellence. Some it's about civic universities and who they are in the local community. That's fine, but again, can you tailor it? What makes them happy? Let's say I used to work for a pro vice chancellor for a faculty. The happiest I've ever seen him was when we got good results in the research excellence framework. He made us all have a couple of hours off at the end of the day on Friday, bought us all champagne. He was so chuffed. I've never seen him so happy in all the 18 months that I worked with him. Okay, so what makes them happy, and how can you kind of make them happy? Yeah. What has they like to communicate? Some people love face-to-face stuff, or Zoom to Zoom stuff. Some people love conversations over email. Some people like to be talked about via Twitter and be kind of picked up in that way. Whatever it might be. So how do they like to communicate, and how can you plug into that? Which universities they think are role models, and how can you use that? So you might say that I'll give you an example. I was at Reading University, was where I was a student and a student officer. I would say that Reading and Surrey are pretty similar institutions. They're kind of both in the southeast. They're both kind of situated a kind of mile outside a major town. The type of student that goes there is very similar. So actually something that works at one may work at another. But if you're competing for students to come to an institution, if you think you've got an advantage over the one that you're comparing yourself to, that's quite useful. Okay, so which universities I think are role models? And similarly, therefore, for you, are you talking to activists and sabbatical officers and students' unions in those institutions too? Because if one institution thinks we can get more students in by doing this work, and then actually you can being able to say, well, that university has done it, maybe we should do it as well. That's quite helpful, I think. Okay. What's the emotional needs? Look, everyone's knackered already. I mean, we're not, you know, we're nowhere near the end of term yet, but everyone's knackered. So there's a kind of challenge there. But genuinely, if you ask someone to do something in the first week of the summer term, you might get a better chance than if you're asking someone to do something in the last week of the winter term. Just to say, however, if you're asking the exams office to do something at the start of exam season, probably not going to work. See what I mean? So you know, what are their emotional needs, and how can you tie into that? The other thing to think about are university strategy, and this partly is to do with when we talked about where the university sees themselves in the future. Can you think about what the language the university are using and how they've envisaged themselves being in years to come? Some universities, basically all university strategies are kind of the same, which are we're going to do good stuff in research, we're going to do good stuff in teaching, we're probably going to do some good stuff in the community, and some of them go, and also we're going to improve our finances. But basically, all universities are kind of got the same strategy, I'm afraid to say. The way they talk about it in relation to that, though, might differ. So, for example, some might say we're going to be good at education, teaching and learning because we're going to be innovative. Now, at that point, you can start using the language of innovation to frame your desires. I think it would be incredibly innovative to do a course on, someone I know does a course on the Foreign Secretary, the British Foreign Secretary, that's the course. And that's great. But actually, it would be really innovative to do that through the prism of how people who have been impacted by that Foreign Secretary's policies, if everything was talking about that impact, that'd be a very innovative way of looking at a course. Yep. And it would fit into the idea of innovative education whilst also talking about decolonization at the same point. Yep. So can you squeeze those things in? And also what the values of the people in the organization. And I think this really is, this might be kind of organizational values. Some institutions I work for say what we are is the local university with international values. Yep. Some say that their values are all about teaching excellence. Some say they're about widening participation. So you might be able to fit into the university values, again, very similar to the strategy. But what about the values for that person? And again, we're sitting there thinking about tailoring your discussion to the person right in front of you. What are the values that they hold dear? One of my big kind of values is student activism and democracy, and I love to help student activists when I can. For other people, that's not one of their values, but how are you tailoring your message to that person and to their values? There is no such thing as the university. There are lots of people that work within it. Cool. I'm going to pass over to you for thoughts at this stage about the question really is, how would you find out about someone in university administration? If you agree with my idea that you need to kind of tailor your campaigning, how would you find out about someone so you can do that tailoring? I'm going to pose that question for you. You can pop it an answer in the chat, mainly so that I can stop talking for a second and take a glass of water, but happy for your thoughts.
Just to say, if you're typing an answer, make sure you click all panelists and attendees so that other people who are in attendance can see what you're saying as well.
Great, thank you, Tom. Cool, Brilliant, cool. So just to pick up on some things that I've said. So you've got some good examples for Googling them and checking their LinkedIn. For those of you who've been trained by me over the summer, I do 2 courses, but one of them is about organizational power. It's amazing what you can find out by people by Googling them. And you can find out that people are trustees of kind of different charities as well as their kind of day job. You can find out that, you know, there's an example of I think it was one of the Manchester universities I did this with. One of the people they lobbied, one of the people that they thought they might have to lobby, constantly on Twitter was moaning about traffic on their way in. on their way into the court, on their way into university. And I was like, if you want to do work on commuter students, like, that's great. Chat about that. Chat about the fact that isn't it awful? Like, it takes ages to get in on the trams or whatever. Some people are saying stalk their Facebook, perhaps. You know, be respectful to some extent on this one. But absolutely check their LinkedIn. That's a great example. See what they've done in the past. As I say, if you look at my LinkedIn, you'll find out that I'm a governance person, but also I've been a welfare officer in a students' union. I've been a sports and societies officer in a students' union as well. So I've got loads of kind of backgrounds that you might lobby me in different ways. Okay, absolutely. Dylan talks about staff pages on university websites. Look at what their research is. Someone who has written about, you know, someone who you might know simply as being the Pro Vice Chancellor for Teaching and Learning. That's kind of what you might know them as, but then you find out that actually they've done work on kind of a decolonizing impact in terms of their research area. You can use that. Yeah, they might have been talking about perceptions of women in text, and you can use that in a different way. So, you know, all of that stuff is really helpful finding about their research. Absolutely, you should be looking at your people within your students' union, your staff member, and your SABs. Find out what information they can pass on about someone. And again, remember I talked earlier on about ensuring that you are kind of chatting to other activists. You know, have an idea about kind of what things, have an idea about what people's backgrounds are, and have that recorded somewhere that you can access. Great. Yeah, those are all kind of areas that I would look at. Cool. So students escalate pressure through campaigning. That's the next step on that kind of chart. And I'm not really going to talk about tactics and stuff here because you've had lots of much better people than me talk about that. But I would say this, look, shock horror, universities are bureaucracies, and you may dislike that, but eventually you're going to have to engage at some point. And even when I've spoken to people and they've said, oh, we had a really positive kind of campaign and that was successful. And I was like, yeah, but eventually university administrators had to talk about it. Eventually there was a meeting that it went to, and that's kind of where you had to be kind of engaged with. Yep. So I would say it's important, as well as the campaigning aspect, to think about the bureaucracy aspect as well and how you engage with that. When we look on that chart at the next step, the administrator often set up a committee to look into the issue and offer recommendations. We're going to talk about this in a second, but I've highlighted this point: students claim victory. And I think that's what's important, is that if you're an activist, your victory is not when the university say yes to looking at something, it's when it's actually happened. And some of you who are not, some of you, your skills may not be based on being on committees and navigating bureaucracies. That's fine. There are other people that will be that. But don't stop when you think that someone has said yes. That's not when, that shouldn't be when you claim victory. And I think there's a fault here, actually, not kind of talked about on that chart, about students claiming victory too early. Okay, the campaign's over when it's over, when the demand has actually been implemented, not when someone says, yes, we're going to look at that. Okay. But university bureaucracies, I know that some of you may have had the conversation with, I've seen the session with Sam, who said that they didn't agree with having a task and finish group at all. That's fine. I've chatted to her about this and we disagree, and that's cool. Task and finish groups have got two characteristics. Can anyone tell me what they are in the chat? What are the two characteristics of task and finish groups? Yeah, Tom's there. They have a task and they finish. Characteristics in what sense? That's it, basically. The task and finish groups should have a clear task and they should have a point where they finish. They set actions, they execute them. Absolutely, that's really great. I think that the problem is that sometimes we have a task and finish group, and what it actually is a working group or a subcommittee or a talking shop. It's really important that the task and finish group has a clear task and a clear point for finishing. Okay, so if you find yourself on a task and finish group to deal with, you know, whatever action it might be, make sure it has those two things and make sure they're really clearly stated. It's really important as well that the power of the group is defined. Okay, now some task and finish groups will have delegated power to go away and make changes. Some will have the power to make recommendations, and that's what you really want to look for, is what is the power of this group. It's not unreasonable, I think, in some university bureaucracies to say that the teaching and learning committee set up a group to go away and make recommendations, but understand that that doesn't mean that it's going to happen on the basis of that recommendation. There might be more lobbying to do, but understand kind of what the definition of that power is in that group. If it is merely to look into, as kind of one of the suggestions on that kind of diagram was, then that's not good enough. You need to actually be able to execute, to do something. If you find yourself in a task and finish group, get to know the people in the meeting for the reasons that we talked about before. Get to know what they're like, have a kind of little portfolio of what their kind of interests are, what their powers they have, what influence they might have. That's really key. Build allies outside the meeting. When you understand what people's kind of points of view are, you won't really have time to build community, actually, inside a meeting. It's not the place to do that on the whole. But in a non-COVID environment, this is where I say it's really important that you have tea and coffee with people outside, that you get there early, that you hang around outside afterwards, you get to know people informally, you chat to them about what's going on in the world at the moment, that kind of stuff. That informal discussion is so important. What we call soft power is so absolutely key. And make sure you are building those kind of ally relationships outside the meeting, so that when you need to do something inside the meeting, you've got that relationship there. You can't really do that if the task and finish group is meeting 3 times over, once a month over 3 months, and then reporting back. You don't really have time in the meeting to do that. So you need to do some of the work outside. Get to know your clerks. I'm a clerk of many a meeting, and so I would say this. But clerks, the people that are kind of doing the minutes, putting together the paper, that sort of thing, they have huge amount of power in terms of getting, in terms of getting stuff on the agenda, in terms of the way stuff's presented, in terms of getting stuff out early. Get to know them, get to be their friends, send them a Christmas card, all of those things. That is actually really important kind of aspect of getting access to power. Okay. Similarly, check the minutes of the clerks. Ask, if you know them, you can ask for them early and check through to make sure they reflect the discussion. Don't just leave the preparation until as you walk into the next group. Kind of make sure you're kind of doing that work outside the meeting as well. And similarly, follow up after the meeting. If you do have, say, a monthly meeting, your follow-up point is a week after the meeting, not any later than that, to make sure that action kind of keeps going on. Some things to look out for. There can be an overload on individuals within groups, especially if it is a group to do with equality and diversity and liberation, and someone on that group has one or more characteristics relating to that work. Yeah, there's an expectation of free work to be done by that person. I was on the Athena Swan, which deals with promoting women in academia. I was on one of those working groups, working groups, task and finish groups at the institution I worked at, and there was real frustration from some of the people on there who were women, going, well, actually, we also are professors and we also need to do research work, and with all of those needs, you're also expecting us to do additional free work so that we can be the face of this activity, and that was really frustrating. And so one of the things that I did in my kind of role as a support person for the Pro Vice Chancellor was, I said, right, some of my time will be to do the admin and to do the work around this. So it's not the expectation that you will do all of those bits and pieces. I will do it, and I will take that away from you. So watch out for overloads on individuals, including yourself. I think Sam did chat about the idea that they wanted her to be a co-chair of a committee, and you're like, great, so you've got a sabbatical officer who was already incredibly busy, has to do some other work in relation to this. I mean, it might be one of your priorities, that might be okay, but watch out for overload on individuals. Watch out for resolutions that are unclear. And again, proposals which are just proposing something and chatting. I much prefer, I don't really like proposals, I quite like recommendations. If you can't make the decision, then you kind of recommend to someone else, but this kind of proposal is a bit kind of woollier. Make sure you know where or when reporting is happening. So again, task and finish group, it needs to finish. So that's the when, but also where. So are you going to, if you don't have the power to make changes yourself, are you reporting to the group that does? Yep. So have a real sense of that. Watch out if that isn't very clear in the terms of reference for the group that's been set up. And also no transparency. I'm a big proponent of transparency. My general recommendation is that we publish literally everything. And I'd say to you, see if you can encourage the publishing of documents. So, and that we'll come on to another reason why it's important in a second, but be really transparent and clear about what's being discussed and where, and encourage not just the minutes to be published on websites, things like that, but also documents as a whole. Say that you want the task and finish documents to be sent to the student activist groups that have kind of created the task and finish group, all of that stuff. I would really push for that because it's only a good thing, really. Cool. The last thing on that kind of list was committee drags its feet until the summer break, at which point the activists, experienced activists leave. This is a danger and it happens. And the thing that I kind of want to say is that universities are slow. They normally take more than 1 year to do stuff. That is frustrating. I get that. But universities are huge organizations, and sometimes things take longer than a year, not out of malice, but just because that's the way things work. And you can do what you can to speed stuff up. But I think you should prepare for the fact that you will very often be building on things that will not happen in your time. So if you're a final year student and you're doing loads of good work now, it is highly unlikely it's going to be in for next year. The prospectus for next year will probably already have been kind of designed and printed and done. So it's already too late to decide on some of the things that you want to do for next academic year. I really am sorry for that, but that is kind of just true in many cases. So on that basis, you've got to prepare for embedding things later than kind of the time that you're on a group or a task. So ensure you have principles and goals built into committee terms of reference. Ensure that's really clear, that you know exactly what you're doing. That's built into the committee terms. It's not simply, the committee terms don't simply say, we're going to meet once a month. It's going to go, this is what we're here to do. Yeah. And remember right back to the start of this session, I said it was really important for you to have clear campaign goals. Get those written in. Set a timeline with check-in points and leeway, and to have that as a regular agenda item. So, you might be going at this point, we're going to have a new set of curriculum rules ready for 2022. Yep. So what's that look like? And what that means is that you're going to need to have by 2021, by the time the prospectus has kind of gone out and students are choosing their options for universities, they're going to have a really clear sense of what the curriculum is going to involve. That's your timeline. Yep. So what are the checkpoints before that that you've got in? And leeway, don't have everything up until the last minute. So actually ensure that you've got a couple of months leeway to get stuff done, so that things can drop off, or there can be a pandemic and everyone kind of has to change their focus or whatever it might be. Plan for succession. This is partly about you, and if you're a student activist group that does stuff over several years and the group exists outside, plan for succession internally. This could be about election candidates for your individual group, but also for the Students' Union as a whole. There will already be student politicians thinking about whether or not they're going to be running to take over from Toby and others next year. I don't think that one thing that I don't think happens enough is that when someone declares, say, I'm going to run to be your next VP Welfare, vote Nick Smith #1, people don't come up to you and go, hi, we'll help you if you agree to these things, or we will promote the candidates that say yes to these demands and will carry on our good work. I think you should be helping to plan for succession and making it not just your manifesto, but other people's manifestos, and encouraging support. It's what kind of lots of organizations do in terms of national elections. Are you doing that for your Students' Union election as well? More bureaucracy. Union council motions. Are they there? Can you hold your people to account next year to do work based on the fact that the Union Council has a motion? One thing I think often falls down with Union Council motions is very often because someone is an activist and they go, what we really need to do is ensure that in week 3 there is this action. What you end up with is kind of the motions become about actions, not necessarily values and goals. And that makes it difficult, because it means that next year someone can come in and go, well, we will do a refreshers fair in week 3, or we will hold a Black History Month. But are we also going to be doing work specifically on decolonisation rather than raising awareness? Yep. See what I mean? So actually thinking about values and goals in those motions, not just an action to do, is really important, embedding that into the culture of the organisation. The thing I would say is, look, things are hopefully changing at the moment. And we have seen with the pandemic that some things can change quickly. You need to see what happens in terms of online teaching. We clearly have not solved that. I'm not suggesting we have, but things can change quickly. And there might be an opportunity now to say, look, we've changed things quickly in the past. Can we change this quickly as well? But what I would say is that everyone is very, very tired at the moment. And I would say, don't ask for too much, but hopefully things will change. And if you are frustrated by the fact that things take more than a year, you are not alone. But I think that, choose your time, and hopefully you can push that a bit. But I don't think that you're going to be looking at changes for even 2021 at this stage, more likely 2022. And that's okay in terms of the kind of big picture. That might be frustrating, but I think, build up your resilience to that fact now, rather than getting disheartened and letting it just fall off the wayside when you leave in the summer, if that's what's going to happen. Cool. So my 3 takeaways, and I'm going to open up for questions, are to get to know individuals and structures you are lobbying, tailor your message but have clear, consistent goals, and plan for succession for when you are no longer around. Great. That is me. But I'm very happy to take questions and thoughts from all of you. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to stop sharing, because hopefully I can see people. Oh, it's just easier. Cool. Has anyone got any comments, any questions for me? Anything you're like, Nick, that's rubbish, don't agree with you at all? Anything that's like, Nick, you're amazing, I agree with you completely?
Just something that's come through in the comments for you, Nick.
Yeah.
It says it's quite hard to be setting out timelines when the lack of understanding of university processes and how they work. Would you recommend anything for this?
Great. Yeah, that's a great one. That's from Dylan, isn't it? So some of this is about understanding your university structure. So arts, kind of University Arts London, so understanding where they make decisions and who are the players in that. And Dylan is one of my regular clients. We can have a chat about that kind of outside. So I think that it is important to understand how the university processes work. And look, it's a frustration that most officers kind of get to understand this by the end of their year, but not at the start. And so one thing I would say is that your role is always about making life easier for your successor in terms of this work. And so jotting down kind of who has power, who doesn't, and to help them understand the processes. But also you should be talking, pardon me, to your union staff and seeing if they can give insight about who actually kind of holds power there. In terms of timescales, it might also be about doing things like feeding into university strategies, not necessarily just at the overall strategy, but you might have a teaching and learning strategy, yeah? And that might be being developed. And can you say into that, great, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that decolonisation is one of the things that we can look back on and say, there's this amount of different voices have been heard at this stage. Great point about academics could be good source for inside information. That's absolutely true. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, and again, find out who your allies are in terms of academics. And look, a kind of anecdote, I suppose. I used to date an academic, and he was quite frustrated by the fact that he would go and students would come up to him and say, I've got this issue, and he'd go, great, go and talk about it, and these are the people that you need to talk to, but I don't have power. I know I'm a lecturer, but I don't have power, you do. And so actually sometimes that can be useful. My caveat to that is also watch out for people that are trying to influence you. And I've been a student officer where other officers have come up and said, I've got this great idea. And you're like, is that a great idea? Or is that something that an academic told you to say? Because I'm not sure that is a good idea. So just watch out for, if you're in a position of lobbying power, being lobbied yourself. Do you have thoughts about how to mobilise students publicly around an issue without compromising positive working relationships with staff in the committees? Look, it's a difficult one. I think sometimes there is a kind of building up of the understanding of what the union is doing. Sometimes it's about understanding that you don't get everything that you want. Sometimes it's understanding about there are points where you need to not push too hard. So I've been in situations, so on a training course, I do a simulation at the end of the day. And sometimes I get people going in and going, you hate students, everything's awful. At which point I'm like, well, hold on a second. And you can push too hard there and ruin the relationship elsewhere. And in fact, real life example, when I was again working with a pro vice chancellor, there was a student SAB just for our faculty. And the first time he met the VC, the pro vice chancellor, he basically said that he thought that he hated students, which he didn't. And the pro vice chancellor was quite taken back and was like, I think you should apologise for that. And the student officer refused to. And then that was it. The relationship was gone for the entire year. There was no point ever again they could get any outcomes at all because they basically just ruined that relationship. Okay. So I think how to mobilise publicly around this issue without compromising. I think there are points where you say, look, we agree with you on this, we disagree with you on this, and understanding that's not about that's not about being personal about things. It's kind of your job to be critical, a critical voice, and that's important to do, whilst also saying, yes, we can work with you on this one. Again, personal kind of anecdote. When I was at Reading University, there was a point where we found out they were closing down the physics department. We found it out from the newspaper. We weren't told ourselves, and we organised lots of work around that about how unhappy we were. But we would actually be doing a demonstration outside the VC's office against the closure of physics in the morning, and in the afternoon, I was working with the VC on a panel on student discipline. But I understood that this bit we agree on, this bit we do not. We're not going to agree with you on everything, but just because we don't agree with you on here doesn't mean that we can't also work with you positively on this one. Yeah, so hopefully there's a kind of maturity of understanding there, kind of from the university side as well. I'm not sure that's helpful, Jason, but I'm happy to, if you can get my details, you can track me down. We can have a chat about the specifics later if that helps. Any more for any more? Oh, it did help. Good. I'm pleased. Thanks, Jason. Cool. Well, look, I haven't put it up, but I'm on Twitter. You can find me not replying to all West things, but certainly engaging with folks. And I think Toby retweeted some stuff earlier on. So if you want to drop me a message, very happy to do that. It's been I've enjoyed today. Thanks very much. Thanks for your questions. Sorry it's not a bit more interactive. And just a general thing I'm going to say, as I'm the very last bit, I'm going to say massive thank you to Birmingham Guilds for organising this, especially the officers. I'm also going to say thanks to Tom Snape, who I know has had an aspect of organisation, and everyone else from the staff team. I think it's been a really fantastic thing to see in the Students' Union sector. As someone who kind of obviously works within it. So thank you all for the work that you've done over the conference, and thank you for those of you who are delegates for engaging, and that's it. Great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. Yeah, obviously this is the final session, so thank you to those in the audience who've been with us for the whole time and or have been nipping in and out throughout the week. If you've missed anything, every session has been recorded and they will be made available in good time.